The Lumix S9 was and always will be a controversial camera. Maybe it was from the way Lumix handled the release, a few of the build quality issues, or the lack of features like a shutter or a hot shoe. I was definitely on the hate train when Lumix announced this camera, but then, a year or so later, I went and bought one, and it's been my most used camera for the last 5 or so months. Before getting into it, I'd love to know what your initial impressions of the Lumix S9 were, and if they've changed over time. Anyway, let's dive into the full review. Starting off with, for me, the most controversial aspect of the S9, the physical design and build quality. I think the build quality complaints are just blown out of proportion. Is it the best build quality? No. Does it feel a little plasticky? Sure. Does it still feel durable and high quality? Yes. I really think the build quality complaints just aren't justified. For a full-frame compact camera, sacrifices have to be made to keep it in the price range that this camera comes in at. And that means it's going to be a little plasticky. It's not going to feel as high quality, but that doesn't mean it's not durable, it's not a great camera, and the build quality is terrible. The build quality is more than fine enough, and I wasn't upset with the build quality for the price. Plus, it helps keep the weight down, which is nice on a camera that's meant to be more compact and a take-everywhere camera like the S9. The physical design of the camera is good, but not great. It's very much a first-generation camera, and it feels like that. Some things work well, some don't. The lack of a grip, for example, isn't a big issue with smaller lenses, but with heavier lenses, a grip attachment makes a nice difference. I've got a video about the accessories I pair with my S9 linked in the description for you to check out. I do find the indent for the thumb on the back of the camera really helpful to getting a secure grip, although I wouldn't mind if it was a bit deeper just to really get a secure grasp on the camera. Overall, I found the buttons easy enough to reach and operate, but I wish there were more. When you look at smaller cameras like the A7C II and some other compact bodies, they tend to have more dials and buttons. A third dial would make a huge difference in the overall usability of this camera. This would give you a dial for aperture, a dial for shutter speed, and a dial for ISO, letting you shoot in full manual mode much easier. I originally thought I'd be able to use lenses with an aperture ring to mimic having 3 dials, but for some odd reason, Lumix doesn't let you do this. So if you do have an aperture ring on the lens, one dial becomes useless and ISO is still stuck behind a second button press. This is by far my biggest nitpick about the camera, and it still drives me crazy. I get around it by using shutter priority and still love using the camera, but it feels like a major oversight and something that could easily be fixed in a firmware update. So if anyone from Lumix is watching this, please, I beg you, fix this. Sorry, getting a little sidetracked, back to the design. The dials on the camera feel fine. A lot of people complain about them feeling cheap, but they get the job done and feel totally fine to me. I haven't had any issues with the rear dial like some others have, and don't suspect I will. It is a bit small, but like I said, it gets the job done. It does what it needs to do. The S9 doesn't have an EVF or a viewfinder, and that hasn't personally bothered me. For an everyday carry like I'm using the S9, I don't find the need to have an EVF on my camera. That being said, if an EVF is something you are looking for in a camera, the S9 is totally not the right option for you. For day-to-day, I find the rear screen is totally fine to compose and use to shoot my photos or videos, and I found it was perfectly bright in sunny days, so I wasn't worried about not having an EVF, and I was totally happy with the rear LCD screen. The only real issue I have with the Lumix S9's design is the LUT button. In theory, it seems like a great idea, a real easy button to press to turn your real-time LUTs on and off and adjust those settings. However, because it juts out from the camera body, when you're wearing the camera on a strap, I find it accidentally turns on and off while it hits up against your body, which is a real nuisance when you go to take a photo and you have a real-time LUT on, or you don't have a real-time LUT on and it's not what you expected. Now, it may sound like I'm complaining a lot, but the camera really isn't too bad. It's just very much a first generation. A first generation of any device is going to have a lot of room to improve and a lot of learnings from that first generation and the feedback they get. So I can only hope that the next S9 is going to improve on all these small issues and be a much better overall camera, but it doesn't make the current S9 bad. Now, onto the fun, photo quality and shooting experience. I enjoyed shooting with this camera. Despite its quirks, it's just fun. I think my enjoyment mainly comes from the smaller form factor, paired with such a great sensor, the rangefinder shape, and of course it also helps that the green color looks amazing. Part of the reason I like the X100V so much is the form factor, and the S9 tries to take a page out of Fuji's book. It's not a perfect copy of the X100V, but it's not trying to be, it just draws a little inspiration, and you can feel that when carrying the camera. I find the S9 feels very modern. I'd say it's on par with my experience using Sony and Canon. The UI feels snappy and operating the basic systems of the camera feels pretty intuitive. although it did take me a while to get used to real-time LUTs and how they work, but we'll get into that later on in the video. What really shocked me with this camera is how much I enjoyed the autofocus. When it came to photos, it felt just as fast and accurate as my A7 IV, which is pretty damn good, and insane when you think about where Lumix was with autofocus a few years back. This really helped me enjoy the shooting experience. I was able to focus more on my composition and less about if the camera was getting the shot or not. This sounds obvious, but one of the reasons I sold my GH5 and G9 was because of the poor autofocus performance, so I had a lot of reservations about the autofocus, and I was definitely impressed, and I'm really happy Lumix has figured this out. However, good autofocus is only useful if the image quality is good, and it's really impressive. Sure, the sensor isn't some crazy high megapixel sensor, but at this point I honestly think anything over 15 megapixels is more than sufficient, and you could probably get away with less. I still feel like I had plenty of resolution to crop and reframe the images shot on the S9, and like I said, I was really happy with those images. I found I had plenty of room to push and pull to craft the images in the look I wanted, and I actually even created my Selishots Lightroom presets all using photos on the S9 that are 100% free. There's a link in the description to check them out. I was also really impressed with the low light and high ISO performance. I pushed the ISO on this camera further than I have any other camera, and the sensor handles it super well. The images were clean no matter how high the ISO was, and it really just blew me away. Now to address another one of these controversial choices of the camera, the lack of shutter and hot shoe. Honestly, I was really worried about the lack of a shutter. I was afraid I was going to get a lot of rolling shutter and a lot of my shots would be unusable, and that just wasn't the case. I very rarely saw rolling shutter issues in my photos. Is this going to be a sports camera or something for high action intense stuff? No. But is it fine for everyday shooting and most use cases? Yes, the sensor reads out plenty fast for most situations. Now surprisingly, the lack of a hot shoe bothered me more. I would have loved if there was mic and accessory attachments that could use a hot shoe and go directly into the camera, but unfortunately because it's not a hot shoe, you can't do this. I also don't use a flash often, but there was a handful of times when I was out using this camera where I really wish I could have put a flash on. Mainly when I was out with family and friends, it would have just been really nice to have. If you're someone who uses a flash often, the S9 is definitely not for you. If you even want to use a flash a little bit, I'd shy away from it. But if you're not worried and you don't shoot with a flash at all, there's no reason to be worried about the lack of a hot shoe. One of the features I was really looking forward to when it came to photography on the S9 is real-time LUTs. And as a big fan of Fuji recipes, I love the idea of getting a full frame sensor, amazing low light, insane video specs, and something similar to Fuji recipes all in a small package. Honestly, after using real-time LUTs, I've got mixed feelings on it. Now, others don't agree with me on this, but I actually found real-time LUTs harder to figure out than Fuji recipes. I just think Fuji recipes were a bit more straightforward to me. However, once you figure it out, it's not too bad. It just takes some time. I think a big part of this is because there's not a lot of resources out on real-time LUTs yet, and there's tons on Fujifilm recipes. When it comes to the images, Lumix did a really good job giving you control over the looks you can create with real-time LUTs. You can really dial in the look and feel of a real-time LUT, or RTL as I like to call them. I actually made a pack of 4 RTLs available 100% free. I'll have them linked in the description. I definitely had more room to craft the look I wanted than I did when I created my Fujifilm recipe. And that's pretty much where my enjoyment for RTLs end. For some reason, despite the extra control you get over the look, I found images shot with Fujifilm recipes just look better. I think it comes down to dynamic range. Fuji does a really good job of giving you maximum dynamic range when shooting JPEGs, and I find the RTLs always either blew out the highlights or fully crushed the shadows. It was hard to get an even exposure with them. In even lighting, RTLs were great, but as soon as you get more contrasty scenes, they start to fall apart. They aren't bad, they're just not as good as Fujifilm recipes. Maybe this is a hot take. Has anyone else noticed this, or is it just me? Anyway, I did really try to negate this with my own set of RTLs, and I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. So if you have an S9 and you like to take photos, like I said, there's a link in the description. Please give them a look. They're all free. I will give Lumix a ton of credit for the Lab app. It is by far the fastest, cleanest, and easiest to use camera app from any manufacturer that I've used so far. And it definitely made using and trying out RTLs easier. I really hope Lumix keeps developing RTLs and supporting them, because it's got so much potential. It's just lacking a community of users like you have with Fujifilm and their recipes. Sorry, I hope I didn't get too sidetracked. Real-time LUTs and Fujifilm recipes are just something I really enjoy using in cameras, and it's part of the reason I got the S9 to begin with, so it's something I'm passionate about. Anyway, if you want to see a comparison between the S9 and another Fujifilm camera like the X106 or maybe the X-E5, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, with that, image quality is over, so let's move on to video. There's no denying that the video quality of the S9 is top tier. it's pretty hard to find a full-frame camera with better video specs and quality than the S9, especially in its price. I'm not going to go through all those specs, there's plenty of resources out where you can check them out, so let's talk about what shooting video is actually like. There's two video features that really make the S9 stand out to me. The first is IBIS. Lumix really has their IBIS game locked down, and I love that I didn't need to worry about taking a tripod with me and felt confident I could get most, if not all my shots handheld with little to no shake. For an everyday carry camera, this is huge, and I actually was able to shoot more video than I would have on something like my Fuji X100V or Fuji X100VI. It just felt so confidence inspiring. The other feature that I really enjoyed for video is real-time LUTs. They work way better for video than they do for photos. Being able to import my favorite LUTs and get the colors I want without having to deal with grading or adjustment layers is so nice for a camera like this. The S9 is all about creating content on the go and quickly, and real-time LUTs really helps with this process. I mainly use phantom LUTs, and they've been perfect. I find all I need to do is add a slight contrast curve in post, and I'm super happy with the images and the look I'm getting with little to no extra effort in post, which allows me to get out content shot with the S9 quicker. There are a lot of videos that are going to go way more in depth into video with S9. I shot a lot more photos with my S9 than I did video, but all I can say is I'm very happy with the video, and I think it's a great camera for content creators who shoot a lot of video. So who is the Lumix S9 for? Honestly, this took me a bit longer to figure out than I expected. For most vloggers, shooting on something like the Osmo Pocket 3 makes a lot more sense. It's simpler to use and more portable for vlogging. So it's not a vlog camera. For professional video shooters, there's some great features, but some major drawbacks, like a single SD card slot. For photographers, there's some pretty big cons, like the lack of a shutter or hot shoe. But yet, a lot of people don't need all these features, and it can still get some fantastic photos and videos. It leaves the S9 as a jack of all trades, master of none, which makes figuring out the ideal user a bit difficult. After a lot of thought, I think this camera fits into a few different categories. First off is the content creator who mainly shoots talking heads, but also wants to vlog occasionally. It's solid on a tripod, stabilization is good enough for vlogging, and it can take a good photo when needed. All things this style of content creator needs. The second is as a C-cam to someone who uses Lumix L-mount cameras. If you've got an S1 II or an S5 IIX, this camera makes a perfect C-cam. It's smaller and lighter in your bag, it can match the performance of the more professional bodies, and it's super useful for getting an extra angle. Also, when you're not using it as your C-cam, you can use it as your everyday carry and take it out when you're going out with family and friends. I don't think it's a good B-cam because it's not as good as the S1 II or the S5 IIX, and your B-cam should always be just as good as your A-cam. The last person I think the S9 is perfect for is the do-it-all hobbyist on a budget. If you want a capable full-frame camera, it's hard to beat the S9. Not only is it priced well for a full-frame camera, but it's also super versatile. It can shoot great photos, it's very capable with video, but it's still small enough for an everyday carry. For a hobbyist who wants to explore different styles and formats, who only wants one camera body, but still wants to be able to daily carry that camera, the S9 is a perfect pick. So after my time with the S9, was the hate justified? Absolutely not. It's a very capable camera, even with its quirks. However, would I buy an S9 again? Honestly, up until writing the script, I would have said yes in a heartbeat. But in all reality, I don't have a use for the S9. It sits somewhere between my A7 IV and X100V, and doesn't do enough different to really justify it. The other thing that would make me hesitate is how often I felt like I wanted to pick up the S9. Despite the great image quality, the form factor, and the specs, I just didn't want to pick it up and use it as often as I expected. The best camera is the one that you want to pick up and shoot with. And if your camera doesn't make you want to pick it up and shoot with it, it's probably not worth keeping. Let me know what you think of the S9. Do you have one? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you considering picking one up? For now, go and shoot some photos. Thanks for watching.